This morning's readings from Mark chapter 2. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it. The new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Will. For the past month or so, maybe 5-6 weeks or so, I've stood up here most weeks and have begun saying something like, hey, this spring, here's what we're doing. We're looking at the Gospel of Mark. And it has been brought to my attention by two people that when I say spring, not everybody is meaning the same thing, especially when like a week ago there was ice out and like in the parking lot, and I'm up here saying, this spring, what we're doing, like now or in the future? I was in campus ministry for a long time, so it's programmed into my brain to think of the year as a spring semester, a summer break, and a fall semester. So I'm just clearing the air. I'm acknowledging a lack of clarity on my part, and if you'll just be so gracious as to forgive me and know that I mean henceforth spring semester, a.k.a. starting from January up until the summer. This is what we're doing. So what we're doing during the spring is we're looking at the Gospel of Mark. We're looking at the first eight chapters of the Gospel of Mark, which really are pivoting around answering one primary question, which is, who is Jesus? And so we're looking at these stories, these accounts for ourselves so that we can come to a conclusion. Maybe for some of us, we're still up in the air about what to do with Jesus. And so this, I hope, will be helpful as we look at these accounts, together. I want to begin this morning by thinking about the fact that I'm sure you've noticed, but popular musicians and artists, oftentimes when a musician or an artist is referring to the church or referring to Christianity or referring to the movement that Jesus started, it is oftentimes in kind of bleak terms, depressing terms. So just to give you some examples, remember the song California Dreamin' by the Mamas and the Papas, old school song, great song. All the leaves are brown and the sky is gray. I went for a walk on a winter's day. It's like today. It's just kind of gray. All the leaves are brown. The second verse goes, stopped into a church. I passed along the way. Well, I got down on my knees and I pretend to pray. The preacher likes the cold, which feels like a little jab, a little subtle a little dig. He knows I'm going to stay. And so it's this idea of like, us preacher types, we love cold, dreary, gross days. But me, I'm California dreaming on such a winter's day. Give you another example. Eleanor Rigby, famous old school Beatles song, creepy, ominous. Second verse of that song, Father Mackenzie, writing the words to a sermon that no one will hear, which I hate that line. I've never been a fan of that line. No one draws near. But again, you have this picture of the church as this vacant, empty, lonely thing. And clergy, we're just busying ourselves with stuff that no one cares about. Totally unnecessary. Billy Joel, or as Jim Gaffigan refers to him, Billy Joel. Billy Joel said, I'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints. Just the saints are not fun. They're not fun to be around. We're just, much rather, he's saying much rather be with the sinners than cry with the saints. So that's, there's more, but you get the gist. It's not just music, though. There's also movies. These are the few that came to mind this week when I was thinking about this. Remember in the Da Vinci Code, remember that like creepy religious guy that was always whacking himself in the back, and he tied that thing to his thighs so it was cutting into his thigh. His thigh's always bleeding, just like, I don't know of anyone that's doing that, but that's a pretty messed up understanding of kind of a religious mindset. Babette's Feast, old great movie. We've talked about this in here before, but the church in that is pictured as just so grumpy and curmudgeonly and stingy, or you think of Footloose. You know, the church is like the killjoy. We hate dancing. Children, quit dancing. So you get the impression, but there's so many more examples. You can think of your own, but the idea is, it's just, all that to say is it's so easy to think about what Jesus came to do, what Christianity is. It's just deprivation. It's sad. It's gloomy. It's kind of miserable. And the passage that we just read, I think is so helpful, because what Jesus shows us in this passage is that if that is your understanding of what Jesus came to do, you couldn't be more wrong. Because what Jesus says in this passage is that what he came to do and to bring is a feast, a festive, blowout, full-out party, a feast. In other words, Jesus did not come to bring deprivation, he came to bring celebration. So let's look at it. Let's look at this passage where he gets into this feast. So 3 things I want to show you about really what Jesus shows us about the feast. We'll look at the reason for the feast, the nature of the feast, like what is it, and then the cost of the feast. So the reason for it and the nature of it and the cost of it. First, the reason for it. The passage begins, verse 18, by just informing you that the disciples of John the Baptist and the disciples of the Pharisees were fasting. Fasting back then and today, it's a religious practice wherein you deprive yourself of something good as a way to get closer to something even better. So people often fast. They take a break from food for a moment or a season in order to get closer to God. And it's interesting, if you go over to Luke chapter 18, in Luke chapter 18, you find out that the Pharisees in this time and age of which Jesus is walking around, the Pharisees would fast twice a week. Twice a week. That was sort of their normal practice. But if you contrast that with what the Bible actually says in the Hebrew Scriptures, God commands his people to fast once a year. And they saw that and said, we can do better than once a year. Let's do twice a week. And so that's what they did. They just cranked up the religious devotion. They were fasting twice a week. And so as a result, this was the religious cultural paradigm of the time. This was the standard by which you measured whether or not you were really spiritual or not. You fasted. So in verse 18, when people see Jesus' disciples not fasting, they are very confused, and they go up and they ask him a question. I look at verse 18, it says, why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? In other words, I thought y'all were spiritual. I thought y'all cared about like religious stuff. You're not doing the thing. Why aren't you fitting in with kind of our understanding of religious practices? Jesus could have answered in a lot of different ways. He could have said, hey guys, let's go back to your Bible and find that it says to fast once a year. In other words, y'all need to, maybe dial it back a little, calm it down. He could have said, great question, I'm actually all for fasting. I actually preached about this during my sermon, y'all have now called the Sermon on the Mount. And if maybe you didn't hear the sermon, you can listen to the podcast, but I talk about it. I talk about fasting. He didn't answer in either one of those ways, though. He instead pivots the whole conversation to start talking about a wedding. Look at verse 19. He says, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. This is his answer to the question, why aren't they fasting? He said, because the bridegroom's with them. Now, if you're picturing in your mind modern American weddings, this will not make any sense. Because Jesus is not picturing in his mind modern American weddings. He is picturing, in his day, current Middle Eastern Jewish weddings, which in some ways are almost the exact opposite of modern American weddings. Because in our weddings, they often take place at a church. And the way that it works is you have the groom, and he stands up front, and he just waits like a doofus. And the bride is in the back, and the doors open, and everybody stands up, and the bride comes forward, and Canon and D cranks up on the organ. And it is her making her way to the groom, and it's her arrival is what kicks off the wedding. In Jesus' day, weddings did not take place in a church. They didn't have churches. There was, once a couple was betrothed or engaged, preparing to be married, they separated for a season, and each of them would kind of get ready for the upcoming marriage, wedding. So the groom would prepare a house for them. Usually that just meant building an addition off the side of his parents' house or his dad's house. The bride would prepare bridal wedding garments or do some ritual bathing. But anyway, when the preparation time was over and it was time to get married, the groom was the one that went to her. He made his way to her, and when he arrived, it was with an announcement of a shout or a trumpet. The whole village would have been involved, and when she comes out, it's his arrival that kicks off the wedding. And they go back to his house. The whole village is involved. There's singing, there's music, there's dancing, and this party goes for a week-long kind of wedding reception. And it was the biggest, most social event on everyone's calendar every year whenever there was a wedding in the village. In Jesus' mind, he's picturing that wedding, and his answer to that question, why aren't they fasting? He says, well, the bridegroom's arrived. And they're not fasting because they're celebrating. And if you take this a step down or a step deeper, you'll notice that all throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, God often refers to himself as the bridegroom, that he has come to marry his people. Very intimate language. You see this in Hosea chapter 2, Isaiah 25, Isaiah 62. So here's Jesus, and he's saying, look, God in the flesh is here with me. I am the great bridegroom. In other words, my disciples are not fasting in order to get closer to God. They are feasting because God has gotten closer to them. If you think about this imagery that Jesus uses, I mean, he could have done anything, and elsewhere he does. Oftentimes, he'll refer to himself as the Son of Man or the Son of God or the Creator, the King. He's all those things. But in this particular passage, he uses this wedding imagery, the bridegroom. He's using a explicitly romantic image to describe who he is and what he has come to do, to draw close to his people in order to marry them. That is intimate language, uncomfortable language for some of us. So think about this. As you think about what Christianity is, do you think that what Christianity basically is, this is all a behavior modification program where we're just trying harder to be good people? Is Christianity fundamentally just a religious tradition? We do all these things. We say all these familiar words and prayers every week, and it's important to keep the thing going. And we might benefit too, because we might get some morals out of it. Is that what Christianity is? Or is Christianity fundamentally about savoring and enjoying the love that God has for us in Jesus? I think, according to Jesus, he would say door number 3. I had the privilege of sitting down with a young man who's in his late 20s. This was a number of years ago. And I'd known him for a while, but he had deconstructed from his faith. He grew up in the church, considered himself a Christian, was involved in the youth group, involved in college ministry. Mid to late 20s, he just kind of punted the whole thing. Done with it, done with the church, done with the traditions, done with the whole deal. And I sat down with him, and he was very kind enough to just kind of let me ask him some questions. I was just curious to get to know him and understand his spiritual journey. And at one point, I remember asking him, "Do you miss Jesus?" Like, I was just curious. Like, I'm assuming you've lived for almost 3 decades now with this intimate relationship with someone that's no longer there. I would think that would leave like a gap, a hole. Like, do you miss Jesus? Not the church, not the traditions, not the structures, but like him. And his answer was, no, not really. And, I've always been puzzled about that as I've thought about it. I'm not judging this guy at all. I know all spiritual journeys are complicated, and I don't know what's going on in his heart. But it just made me think, let's just say you're married to someone, happily married for decades, and your spouse tragically dies or something, and so the marriage is over. And after the fact, someone asks you, do you miss her or do you miss him? And your answer is, no, not really. It makes you wonder if you were ever happily married in the first place. And so I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what's going on in his heart, but it did make me wonder. I wonder if he was ever really happily married. Did he experience and taste and savor the intimate love that Jesus had for him? Or is he really just rejecting a religious system and somehow he threw the baby out with the bathwater? I don't know. But at least that's the reason why Christians celebrate. This is why we worship. This is why we feast, because our bridegroom, our soulmate, has come for us. If you think about that, what Jesus is saying by saying, I'm your bridegroom, he's looking at you and saying, look, I see all of your wounds. I see all of your addictions. I see all the things you hate about yourself, all the things you're ashamed of about you. I look at all of it. I'm crazy about you. I'm head over heels for you. I have come as the lover of your soul to marry you. That's the reason why we celebrate. That's the reason why we feast. But let's keep going, because Jesus keeps going. And you might hear all that and say, yes, I'm into that. I'm not into the deprivation stuff, sacrifice stuff, deny myself stuff. I'm not into Jesus taking away my desires. I am into Jesus giving me my desires. And it sounds like, Matt, that's what you're saying he's into. So I'm in. Sign me up for the feast. Is that what Jesus is? Is he just a genie in a bottle? Hashtag Christina Aguilera. Did he just exist to grant us our deepest wishes? Let's look at the nature of the feast so we're clear on what the feast actually looks like that he's offering. He gives us 2 images in verse 21 and 22. Both of the images are kind of making the same point, so we'll look at them quickly. Verse 21, he says, no one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. In other words, he's saying, look, if you have a pair of blue jeans, you have a hole in them, rip in them. If you take unshrunk, brand new cloth, and you put them on these old jeans, and you sew it in there, and then you wash it, that new cloth is going to shrink. And it's because it's attached to the jeans, it's going to pull, and it's going to rip the thing worse. In other words, his point is the old and the new, they don't mix. And then he says the same thing, same idea, verse 22. No one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins. In other words, back then, if you're going to make some wine, they didn't have bottles. So you put unfermented, new wine and new animal skins. That was the container that they used to do it, and they'd cork it or cap it somehow. And the new wine, as it fermented and gas was released, those new skins were kind of stretchy, flexible, and it would kind of inflate like a balloon. It had room to do that. But if you took one that was already inflated and old, and it was now not flexible, but it was brittle, you put new wine in it, it's got no room for the gas to expand, and so it would just break, and wine would spill out everywhere. This point is pretty basic. Old, new, they don't mix. Here's what Jesus is getting at. Jesus is saying, I will not come into your pre-existing ways of living and thinking. I will not just conveniently enter into your agenda for your life and your hopes and dreams for your life, and I'll just show up as a little religious decoration on top. He's saying, no, I have not come to give you your hopes and dreams. I have actually come to blow up your hopes and dreams and to give you much better hopes and dreams, because your hopes and dreams are so small and so selfish. I'm not going to fit into your agenda. You're going to fit into my agenda. I think if we're honest, deep down, we really do think the feast of life, like where I will really get real joy, what will finally make me happy, is if when I get my hopes and dreams for my life. And all of our hopes and dreams, are different, but they're kind of similar. It's when we think, well, when I get that career, that's where I'll get the feast, that's when I'll get joy, or when I get in that relationship, or I have that type of family, or I'm able to get this type of house, or I'm able to have that type of body, or we're able to go on these kinds of vacations, or I'm able to reach this level of enlightenment, or whatever. Pick your thing, but we have our plan for our life. This is my agenda for my life because we think these things will make us happy. My hopes, dreams. The feast is over here. And Jesus is saying, I'm not coming along like a genie in a bottle to just grant you all of your hopes and dreams. I'm actually here to transform your hopes and dreams because I don't fit into your agenda. Now, I want to make this as practical as we can. I'm going to give you 3 examples of how Jesus does not fit into our existing ways of living and thinking and doing. Example number 1, Jesus does not fit into our political paradigm. Jesus doesn't fit into our political paradigm. We all have political thoughts, opinions. Some of us are more passionate about it than others. But it's really easy to take your political system, which, let's keep in mind, it's an American, modern, man-made framework. You take a little Jesus sticker and slap it on the side and says, Jesus approves of this message. And, Jesus is a nice little religious decoration that just baptizes our political opinions. And so we say, yeah, Jesus is Republican. Of course he is. Or Jesus is Democrat. Of course he is. Or Jesus is whatever. Pick something else. Or you say, Jesus is absolutely in favor of everything that Trump's doing. Or Jesus is absolutely appalled by everything that Trump is doing. And so you can take Jesus and just sort of stick him into a political system as a way to say, Jesus endorses all of this, and he's saying, I won't do it. I don't fit. I'm a king. I don't fit into 21st century, man-made political systems. I just don't. He's going to blow up our systems and confront us and challenge us on all across the board. He doesn't fit in our political paradigms. Here's the second example. He doesn't fit into our American dream paradigm. As Americans, we prize success. Success is what we love. It is what we're after. And so what that means is we work as hard as we can so that we can get the best grades that we can, so that we can get the best job that we can, so that we can get the most amount of money that we can, so that we can retire early. And that's the American dream. And it's easy to put a little Jesus steeple on that and say, Jesus is into this. He loves the American dream. I mean, why wouldn't he? Doesn't he want me to be comfortable? Doesn't he want me to be happy? Doesn't he want me to work hard? Doesn't he say something about like working with, do all things with excellence? Isn't that kind of a biblical idea? Doesn't he want me to be generous? How can I be generous if I don't make a lot of money? So I'm going to go make a lot of money so I'm going to be generous. In other words, it's easy to take the American dream, which is a ideal that is largely fueled by materialism and elitism and hedonism and other isms, and just think Jesus is cool with all this. And Jesus is saying, I'm not going to fit. I'm not going to fit into the American dream. In fact, I'm often going to bring you into situations that might look like failure. We sing a line in a song at this church regularly, one of the songs that we sing, one of the lines that we sing as we're praying, make me poor and keep me low. That is an amazing sentence to pray and to sing. That's not the American dream. It might be Jesus giving you your hopes and dreams of making you poor and keeping you low. It doesn't fit into our American dream paradigm. Here's one more. He doesn't fit into our performance paradigm. Here's what I mean by that. Everybody, to some degree, feels this need to project a version of ourselves to the world, and the version that we project to the world is, I want you to be impressed with what you see. So we dress up, and we clean up, and we try to say the right things, and we don't try to put our foot in our mouth. We try to put our best foot forward, and we don't want to go through life with spinach in our teeth and doing dumb things, and so we try to make ourselves look more impressive. And along the way, that might look like us name dropping. Just so you know, I'm actually kind of close with that person that's really famous, and we just borrow a little bit of their glory. Or we post those flattering pictures of ourselves online, and it's just kind of a way to invite the internet to tell us how awesome we are. And or we virtue signal, either in person or online or whatever. It's just a way to let everybody know that the way that I think about the world is good, righteous. I'm one of the good ones. And so we have this agenda for our lives of, look, I'm going to perform, and I'm going to be impressive, and I'm going to have Jesus come into that and even make me more impressive. Years ago, I was doing campus ministry with my wife, and we had this young woman come through our ministry. And she grew up in a home that was extremely pressurized. She just had all this religious pressure, family pressure, personal pressure to be the best, be awesome, be good at everything. And what was challenging for her is that she was incredibly competent. Brilliant, young girl, very motivated, worked hard, just kind of bought into the whole system. And so when you meet her on campus for the first time, she's well-dressed and very smiley, and she's working hard. She gets straight A's, and she eventually goes on to be involved in all these leadership things, and she's awesome. And she'd come through our ministry, and every single week we're telling her about sin and her need for grace and the grace of Jesus, the freedom, the rest that Jesus offers. You can get off the hamster wheel. You can rest. You can be yourself. And we have this tradition in our ministry that graduating seniors could stand up and say something in the last meeting of the year. Before we all broke out for the summer, graduating seniors would come up and just say something and talk about what God's done in their life. And when it was her turn, when she was graduating, she stands up, and she's wearing this great outfit, and she's very smiley, and everything is awesome, #Lego movie. And she has this perfectly curated, cute little speech about how, all through her smiles, about how she realizes she's a big sinner and she is in great need of God's grace. And I'm not throwing any shade at her because I don't know what's going on in her heart. And I don't know what she was thinking. I don't know what she was experiencing. That may have been a really honest, transformative thing for her to say. I don't know. It did come across, though, as if it was another performance, as if she's just taking kind of Jesus stuff, gospel language, putting it on top of a performance paradigm engine and just using it to make herself look that much more impressive. I don't know. But Jesus looks at you and me and he says, I am not interested in giving you your hopes and dreams for your life of you becoming more impressive. I might actually bring you into seasons of your life where you feel more desperate, where you feel like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not impressive. I'm out of control. I'm at the end of my rope. That might be his hope and dream for your life. Now, you hear all this and you think, that doesn't sound like a feast. This sounds miserable. I thought you said Jesus is not into the deprivation thing. He's into the feast thing. But think about it like this. Go back to the marriage metaphor. If you want a marriage that is thriving and is rich and fulfilling, one of the ways that you do that is you exclusively give your heart and your love to your spouse. The moment, if you want to destroy the feast of the marriage, the moment that you give your heart or your love to someone else who's not your spouse, that's when your marriage goes from feast to war zone. And so Jesus is saying, look, I want to feast with you. I want you to come at my table. I want you to experience celebration and joy and delight, but I'm not interested in sharing you. I'm not interested in just letting you wander off after other lovers, like chasing after the love of money or the love of sex or the love of pleasure or the love of power. I want you all to myself. Is that deprivation? For you to say, no, I'm not going to choose something that if I worship it will poison me and kill me. Instead, I'm going to choose a feast instead. Is that really you depriving yourself? Depends on how you look at it. It's you saying no to something so that you can say yes to something infinitely better. That's the nature of the feast. It's available. It is a feast. But he won't share you. And he won't just fit into your paradigm for your life. Last thing, briefly, the cost of the feast. You look at this passage, you get to verse 20, and it takes an ominous turn. Because look at what he says in verse 20. He says, the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away. The bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. The word taken away, it's one word in Greek. It's the only time in the New Testament that this word shows up. Interesting. It means to violently, forcibly remove somebody. And Jesus is saying, there's a day coming when I will be violently, forcibly taken away. The bridegroom will be taken away violently. And of course, the day he's talking about is the day of his death, the day when Roman soldiers show up and violently arrest him and then violently beat him to a pulp and then violently string him up to a cross and forcibly take his life from him. I mean, the cross is so violent, it's so gruesome, it's so inhumane. Here you have a human being that is almost like that unshrunk cloth that is just ripping and being broken. His body's being broken, and he's like that old wineskin that bursts and wine is spilling out, and he's gashed and blood is pouring out of him. I mean, it's gruesome. And you think, why in the world does Jesus, as he's talking about this feast, and he's talking about marriage and love and intimacy, why is he in the back of his mind thinking about something so violent and gruesome? Why does that have to be part of the story? Well, think about a wedding. When you show up at a wedding reception, you show up at a wedding reception and you walk in and you grab your drink or your LaCroix or your champagne or whatever, and you go through the buffet line, you load up on the bacon-wrapped shrimp or whatever, and you go and you get your big piece of cake. You go on the dance floor and you're enjoying the music or whatever. You didn't pay for any of that. You just showed up and ate and drank and danced, and it was awesome. Somebody paid for it, though. Somebody took an enormous hit to their bank account to pay for that bacon-wrapped shrimp and that champagne and that cake and that DJ or that band or whatever. It was 100% free for you, but it was enormously expensive for someone else. In the same way, Jesus is saying the only way that you can get into the feast of God is if the bridegroom pays the bill. And he's telling you, I'm willing to pay the bill. And I'll pay it with my very life. I mean, the reason why he's on the cross experiencing infinite sorrow, it's so that when you trust in him, you might experience unending joy. The reason why on the cross he is just emptying himself, it is so that when you trust in him, you might be full. He came to pay the bill. You know, final thought, and then I'm done. I want to end the same way this passage started, which is, these people come up to Jesus and like, I don't get it. Why aren't they fasting? And it really shows you they really don't understand who Jesus is and what he came to do, because the way that religious people think is they think, hey, we're good religious people, and so we deny ourselves and we make sacrifices and we deprive ourselves so that we can get closer to God. Why aren't they doing that? And Jesus is looking at them and saying, I've got such good news. Because the good news of the gospel is that God denied himself. God sacrificed himself. God deprived himself in order to be closer to you. which means it is all free grace. You just show up. You don't have to pay a dime. It's all been paid for with his blood. The only question is, will you show up? That's the question for you, and that's the question for me. Will we show up to the feast? Let me pray. Father, would you be so kind as to open up our eyes, especially for those of us who understand what you have come to do is to just bring gloom and oppression. For those of us where church and faith has just become a drudgery, just boring, just waiting to get out of here. Would you take us and meet us in all of our distractions and all of our numbness and all of our doubt? And would you show us that you have spread a feast before us, a feast of intimacy and love and connection, one in which our heart is so desperately craving. Give us the faith to feast at your table by faith in your Son. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.